Welcome to the Change With Him podcast. My name is Gerard Uselli. We are on episode 54. This is moving quick. Within 2 weeks, 4 different episodes have been on air, and I cannot wait to explore so many more perspectives of change, one person at a time. This person is a very good friend of mine, one of the great innovators and entrepreneurs, especially within the millennial generation for Staten Island. Very incredible personality and also with intellect, Mike Perina. Mike, how are you today?
Thank you for the kind words, Jerry.
Absolutely. So something that I like to do for all of my guests as far as the first question is what your childhood was like growing up.
So I grew up here on Staten Island. It was rough. I grew up in the projects, moved around a lot. My parents moved to Pennsylvania when I was 15, so I stayed here with my grandparents. But I don't know, I wouldn't do it over. I feel like regardless if you had a bad childhood or not, you learn from those experiences, and that kind of makes you who you are. So, maybe I would have been a spoiled brat if none of this stuff happened, but it's typical, nothing crazy bad, but, not like an average childhood.
Absolutely. And then to your point, I do definitely agree. For the adversities that come into people's lives, it's important to understand in reflection that those moments are probably the things that lead you to where you are today, because that sense of negativity that happens through people, they're able to channel that as motivation for them to get to where they need to be.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like growing up, I was always kind of like an entrepreneur, and it was probably because of the environment that I was around. I kind of had to be, I would always see these potential ways to make money. And it was always just fun and exciting. And that was my way to, try to change my environment around me,
Absolutely. Now, kind of to jump right in, as far as in your background, how did you start getting into product designing? And when was the first time you felt like you were good at it?
So we do some product designing, and it's fun for me. But for the most part, I feel like the primary service that we provide is a client will come to us and say, hey, I need a thing that does a thing, and it has to work with this and has to work with that, right? So we're able to sit there and brainstorm all these different ways. And I'm guessing you can consider that product design. But for me, it's more so just taking someone's idea, kind of being really communicative with him, and figuring out the perfect solution to his problem, right? It's not always through 3D printing. It could be through other means, but just being able to fully understand what he wants made and how it should work, and then being able to do that. So the first time I had a client, and I never did any product design. So when I first started, it was just I knew 3D printing was the future. So I knew that I had to get into it. So I started by selling the 3D printed kits. And then eventually I knew that hey, China's going to come along and I'm going to be outpriced, which is exactly what happened. So I basically built out all my inventory, and I just started a business and no business plan. And then I was just what am I going to make? And I had no idea. So then I had a client just call me up and says, hey, I have an idea for this pooper scooper. And he brought me an initial prototype that somebody else made for him. And to be honest, it was horrible. So we basically just sat there and we were okay, well, you wanted to do this. Why don't we try this? And then we went through maybe 8 iterations, and we actually made it really, really cool. So I think that I have it right here, actually.
Got it.
So this is a 3D printed version of it, and it's really cool. You can put the bags inside here, and then you basically pull the bags out here, throw it over, and then you can actually pick up the poop without actually feeling it squishing between your fingers. But that was the first time that I was just oh, this is actually really fun. We actually provided a very high value to the client. He was more than happy. He eventually wound up getting injection molded, and now he sells in stores from here down to Florida. So that was the first time. We don't only do product design. A lot of times we just do production. So somebody just gives us a file, and we basically just print it in mass. But yeah, either way, the product design projects are definitely the most fun.
100%. And that by itself was a very impressive way, especially just trying to figure it out. That it's remarkable to see what you could come up with, especially in the sense of feeling pressure, you want to make a mark in something too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I feel no matter what the project is, as long as you can bring value, those are the best projects.
100%. Now, this is more of a philosophical question relating to what your field work is like practically every day. Do you believe every problem leads to a solution?
No, I don't think every problem. I feel like there are some things in the world that you just can't change. I mean, the most important thing is like focus and concentrate only what's within your control. You know, like that. As long as you can do that, even if there is a problem that you don't have a direct fix to, you can come up with like a happy medium. You know, when it comes to even say manufacturing, the reason why 3D printing is so big or revolutionary now is because back in the day with traditional manufacturing, an entrepreneur can have an idea for an invention and it could make sense on paper and it's like something that could probably change the world. But then when they go to manufacture it, it turns out like there's not a manufacturing process in the world that can actually make this, right? So like a lot of people, especially back then, they had great ideas, and because 3D printing wasn't the norm, they didn't have a solution for that to create that. So now that 3D printing exists, it just becomes like another tool in the toolbox to be able to kind of bring people's ideas to life.
Very nice. And also kind of to relate it back a little bit to your past, as far as just being social with friends and kind of like your interactions throughout life. Do you feel like a lot of your friends have the same interest as you? And what does it feel like to teach kids this industry today?
All right, so part one, do you mean interest specifically relating to what I do for work?
Exactly. Kind of like within your peer group, like, did you feel like the interest kind of resonated to them, or did you feel like you kind of had to like showcase it more and more by result?
No, Staten Island just traditionally is very blue collar. So there's not a ton of people at all that like I can relate to as far as the subject goes. But you know, that's what like sports is for. That's what trivia is for, you know, to be able to kind of make those connections to other people. But like, yeah, I feel Staten Island itself, like, yeah, there's not a whole lot of interest within this field.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And to kind of elaborate a little bit more, so like throughout the years that I've seen you do what you've been doing with Assembyl, like I notice a lot of stuff as far as teaching kids how to do what you've been doing, and then also kind of showcasing the mechanical aspects and the robotics of it as well. What does it kind of feel like to be in those moments, knowing, especially that you're a father yourself, like having that sense of influence on the generation to come?
Well, I think it's great, but it's also bittersweet too, because like think about it. So when I first started, nobody even had any idea what 3D printing was, right? So like when you finally it's coming a little bit more mainstream and you do these classes and you teach adults, they're like blown away and they're just like, that's so crazy. I never knew we could do this. And like they're really, really like they start actually getting excited, right? And then when you teach kids, like the thing with kids is their imagination is above and beyond any adults, right? So when you're like, hey, look, this is a 3D printer, I can make this. They're like, all right, that's cool. Because to them, like, they don't even know that this didn't exist before, you know? Like back in the day, people would try to come up with an invention and then they figure like, oh, like, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Kids, they haven't gotten to that point yet where they realize there's a lot of things that they can't do. So like teaching them is exciting because they'll run with it because, you know, again, it's within their wheelhouse. Like they just have a lot of creativity and like they think anything is possible, you know? I think STEM is really important, like just getting kids into, you know, science, technology, engineering, and math, like all those things, when you put it with a 3D printer, becomes fun for them. And it's just like, they'll have an idea to do this and then they can make it, you know?
Absolutely. And do you feel like in all that you do for clients, and especially that no day is probably the same, do you feel like that you always have to be ready for change in what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so when I first started, like this is considered a disruptive technology, right? And again, a lot of people didn't really understand what it was, how it worked. And then once it started becoming a little bit more mainstream, and I think there was an article in the New York Post about a 3D printed gun. And that's when people started like really like, you know, getting scared of 3D printing essentially. And then the next topic of concern with a lot of people was that we were going to lose our jobs, right? Like, you know, robots going to take over manufacturing and put people out of work, right? And like, I never agreed with that because I feel like you have to go with the change. Like, look at a Blockbuster. You know, Netflix comes along and more or less puts them out of business because they weren't willing to go with the times. Like, I think all of these disruptive technologies that a lot of people hate, like I think like those are the most exciting things. Like if I wasn't doing anything with 3D printing, I'd be doing something with, virtual reality or augmented reality. Blockchain is a little bit too hard for me to kind of wrap my head around with. And
You're not blaming me for that one.
Yeah, but like all of those industries are disruptive, and like to me that's exciting. Like I just feel like these are things that are going to change the world that have never been done before. It's new, and like it's not boring. Like it's just something that you can be really passionate about and put all of your soul into, and also find a way to make money from it as well.
To kind of build a point, even though a little indirect from what you were talking about as far as the whole robot schematic of like things taking over and to that scenario, one example that I feel like would counter along with what you were saying is just observing, even as a substitute teacher, what it was like to teach remote outside of school versus being in the classroom, and then just seeing the stats speak for themselves for how impactful it actually is for kids to be in the classroom rather than on their computer.
Oh, there's metrics for that you can actually tell?
So there was a lot of studies that came out just based on like whatever outlets that were kind of accessible to people, and then also compared to how important it is to keep kids in the classrooms.
Yeah, I agree. I honestly think that, as necessary as it probably was, the kids not having any social interaction, or like they don't have any interest to be in the learning environment. They're just home, eating their cookies.
Right. And then also oh, go ahead.
Okay. No, good. I have another point, with you.
Just another point on that. So I was talking to a friend the other day, and we were just talking about the intellect of so many kids, but then also with that social interaction point, how unfortunate it is that people, especially in the younger demographic, have a much harder time just talking to each other.
Especially when they're not in school and their screen time is obviously dramatically more than when we were kids, because we just had the big old that we hardly used,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say the other point again.
Sure. So what I was going to say is, aside from the pooper scooper, maybe that was probably the answer. Or if there's another thing, tell me about your favorite thing that you've designed throughout your journey.
Pooper scooper is definitely not the favorite thing. All right, so that one's easy. Like a couple of years ago, we had a request from a Staten Island mother. Their son was missing part of his arm. So we were able to partner with a nonprofit organization called Enable, and we were able to design him a custom prosthetic arm. And of course, like hands down, that's my favorite, because after you deliver it to him, like seeing his face and how excited he was. And I think more or less too, like, to be honest, like he already kind of overcompensated for living without his arm. So he could do everything anyway for the most part, right? But just having that and then going to school and like looking like a superhero, like it really excited him just for having the image of like part robotic, So like hands down, like that's my favorite project that I've done that we've designed for. I would say second, we actually made the buildings for the series finale for Gotham, the Batman TV show.
Wow.
And as a kid, I always loved Batman. So like, it's just really cool to see your work in this series finale and like actually 3D print Gotham,
Definitely. And kind of as a final question, and also a question that I ask every guest that's been on the platform before, what is the biggest change you want to see for yourself?
So I wouldn't say biggest change. I don't have any big changes that I want to make, but let's say consistent change is constant growth. Like I used to go and you have like Time Hop, or like now it's Memories on Facebook, where they show you like a year ago. So like for the last couple of years, you would get the notification and you would see yourself and like remember your mindset at that time. And like, to me, I would always like be embarrassed, because I'm like, oh, I can't believe I was just doing that. Like I was more embarrassed than I was proud. Not that I was doing anything bad, but it was just like, I grew so much more. And then I realized like, that's actually good, right? Like the fact that you look back at yourself 2 years ago and realize, oh, wow, like you weren't as grown as you are now, means that you have that consistent growth. And that's really all I want, is just to be able to consistently grow in different avenues of my life, and just, constantly learn more and get better. And money's also a plus.
Absolutely. And I think you just pretty much copy and pasted my aspirations for the Change Within podcast on that one. So nonetheless, that does conclude episode 54 for the Change Within podcast. For those who want to check us out, but have never had the chance to yet, you can please do so on Anchor, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mike, thank you for joining me today, and have a great rest of your day.
You too, man. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Bye-bye.